Prior to beginning the activity, please be sure to review the faculty information and disclosure statements, as well as the learning objectives. After listening to the activity, complete the post-test by clicking the Earn Credit link in the episode description. Downloadable slides and resources are also available. The following presentation is copyrighted by Medscape. No use, broadcast, or recording of this presentation or any part thereof is permitted without the written authorization of Medscape.
The following presentation is part of a certified educational activity provided by Medscape Education and supported by an independent educational grant from Madrigal Pharmaceuticals.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Lazarus, and I'm a professor of public health based in New York City and Barcelona. Welcome to this program titled Updates on MASH Treatments. I'm joined by a colleague and friend today. Jörn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, my name is Jörn Schattenberg. I'm a gastroenterologist and hepatologist based in Homburg, Germany, at the Department of Internal Medicine of the Saarland University. Pleasure to speaking with you here today, Jeff.
Thanks for joining us, Jörn. And I know you've also played roles at the European Association for the Study of Liver Disease and other societies. So what we're going to do in today's program is have an update on the FDA-approved therapies. We're going to discuss the emerging therapies for MASH, and then we're going to look at some of those public health implications. So, Jörn, to kick us off, what are the latest updates on the two FDA-approved MASH therapies, resmetirom and semaglutide?
Well, thanks, Jeff. And I'd like to revisit the inaugural trials for a start out. The first drug that was actually approved by the FDA 2024 was resmetirom, and that's based on the Maestro-NASH study. So the Maestro-NASH study is actually an ongoing study that evaluates the efficacy and safety of resmetirom in patients with non-cirrhotic MASH. And the importance is that we've had a pre-planned interim analysis after a year of treatment, and we saw that the liver histology really got better. So inflammation goes down, fibrosis, so the scarring of the liver goes down. And based on these surrogates, the FDA said, well, this is so important. We have so many patients affected. This drug is approved. But the study is ongoing, and we're looking at outcomes. So to actually have a positive impact on the overall survival, transplant-free survival, the rates of liver cirrhosis in these patients. Resmetirom is a very interesting drug as it has a mechanism of action that's related to thyroid hormone receptor mechanisms. And it actually has a strong impact on lipids too. So what we saw in the interim analysis of the pivotal trial was that LDL cholesterol in patients that were already treated really went down, and that's good from the cardiovascular side of things. Also decreased LP(a), but it did not do this through weight changes. So this is a unique identifier, I think. We have a drug that improves the liver, improves lipids, but doesn't do it through weight, but through changes of the lipid metabolism in the liver. And while the interim analysis was positive, I think I'd like to highlight two things for resmetirom at this point. One is that, as I've said, the study is ongoing, so we'll learn more about the long-term outcomes of patients being treated. And there are within the study program actually 2 or 3 other studies. Some of them are open label, but we're able to study a subgroup of patients that's specifically interesting, namely patients with cirrhosis. And Professor Alkuri and myself presented this with, among other co-authors at EASL last year, that in an open label treatment arm of resmetirom in patients that had compensated cirrhosis, the non-invasive tests really got better, indicative of the resolution of even cirrhosis. Now, it's important to say that resmetirom is not approved for cirrhotic patients, but there are strong indicators that the cirrhosis might get better. That concept is actually also being studied in a prospective trial, which is the Maestro Outcomes trial that's ongoing and has been enrolled completely, and will see the benefit of resmetirom treatment in patients with compensated cirrhosis. As I said, these outcomes data are eagerly awaited, and I think it's an important subgroup of patients that we'll see in the future.
How long do you think it will take until we start to see the next set of results?
That's hopefully so at EASL already. So we'll meet in a few weeks in Barcelona, and there will be subsequent post hoc analyses of patients from the MASH and NASH, but also the open label studies, and the full outcome study report is expected in the upcoming year. So we'll see interim analysis within this year and then more down the line.
Okay, so that's the EASL Congress that's meeting in the end of May 2026. And then,
And the second time point is always the November meeting, the American Association of the Study of Liver Disease meeting, where we'll also hopefully see more data on this.
so you've walked us a bit through resmetirom, the first approved drug in March 2024 by the FDA. Now, tell us a little bit about semaglutide.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, semaglutide comes from the class of incretins. So it's a GLP-1 agonist, and it has profound effects on body weight and glycemic control. And it's actually approved for the treatment of type 2 diabetes and obesity globally. I would say it's a drug that receives a lot of attention. Now, in the field of liver disease, there's been the ESSENCE trial, which was a similar setup as detailed previously. So this is a long-term outcome study with a pre-planned interim analysis. Now, in that interim analysis, we looked at the changes within the liver. So patients underwent liver biopsy, both at baseline and after 72 weeks. And semaglutide also showed sustained improvement of the inflammatory components, so the MASH resolution, and also a benefit on fibrosis regression after 72 weeks of treatment. And alike with resmetirom, the FDA has granted approval for semaglutide at the dose of 2.4 milligrams to treat patients with non-cirrhotic MASH. And again, this was the ESSENCE trial. I think semaglutide is of particular interest because beyond the changes we saw in the liver, and as I highlighted before, there are robust effects on body weight, glycemic control. There's increased survival data in patients with cardiovascular disease, so reduction in cardiovascular outcomes. And the interesting aspect is that while a lot of this seems to be mediated through weight loss, there are certain effects, even in the liver, that seem to be weight loss independent. We're just starting to understand this, but by turning off the metabolic inflammation in these patients, there are changes in incretins and mediators of inflammation, FGF21, for example. So you can, in models, calculate how much of the benefit you see in patients comes from the weight reduction and how much comes from the indirect non-weight reduction effects. And this was true for semaglutide with regards to this logical resolution of MASH, and speaks to the concept that metabolic inflammation, in fact, affects the whole body. And by turning this off using semaglutide, you also get some weight loss independent effects on the liver. So I thought that it was interesting. That's why I wanted to share it with you and the audience here. We'll see more, and I'd like to revisit the concept that GLP-1 does not act directly on the liver because there's no receptor on hepatocytes in the liver, but it's the indirect effect of weight loss that drives most of the effects. Some of them are likely secondary due to other changes we're seeing in the metabolically diseased environment. The ESSENCE data showed very robust, and I think it's very important to underline again that while there is weight loss with semaglutide, we did see comparable effects with resmetirom for without weight loss. So all of a sudden, you have two classes of drug that you can use in patients where one works through body weight reduction, predominantly some indirect effects, and one that causes or improves the lipid metabolism, and through this mechanism improves the liver phenotype. Safety, quick comment. I think for semaglutide, the safety profile is well established. There are GI side effects, but I would say it's generally manageable, even for a gastroenterologist, and no major signals of liver toxicity, in particular in those patients that do have an underlying liver disease. The same was true for resmetirom safety profile. So here we have two drugs that come up with effects. The question about the clinical positioning, and we can discuss this maybe also in the end again, I think that we're using non-invasive tests today. That's very important to identify the patients. If you have a patient that does have type 2 diabetes and obesity as a key driver, you might consider a GLP-1 based therapy, whereas when diabetes is controlled with medication and weight loss is not the primary target, but you really want to improve the liver phenotype, resmetirom is a drug to be used in these patients. And with that, I think I'll hand it back to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for that overview of both these drugs. And now the clinical practice guidelines have been updated, so it's very clear when and how to prescribe. The safety's been proven, and they're both approved by the FDA. So really, over the last 2 years, the field has changed drastically. Now you can tell people living with these conditions that if they have fibrosis stage 2 or 3, there's not one but two different treatments that have been shown to work. And that gives hope to the field. That means we want to diagnose more people because, in addition to the lifestyle interventions, which we know work, but they're not always easy in the real world, now we have these drugs that can be prescribed, and together we can see some really remarkable results. I think it contributes to reducing the stigma, to raising the awareness. And now we also have a mention of these conditions in a major UN political declaration, a high level meeting on NCDs, non communicable diseases, last year, 2025. And we have a proposal for a World Health Assembly resolution on steatotic liver disease, which encompasses NASLD MASH, but also MET ALD and alcohol related liver disease. And that would be the first time the World Health Organization has a document about these conditions. And it would really give an impetus for WHO and its member states to get further engaged in addressing MASLD and MASH. And I think something for clinicians to remember is that we need to go beyond the medications. So we need something that I call nutrition aligned drug rollout. We need to really work with people about improving their diet, improving their physical activity. Even just a little bit can often make a difference. And we need to tell them that it's not just the medicine alone, but those kinds of activities, interventions that they can do themselves, but we can also help link them to community services. And I'm wondering, Jörn, you told us about resmetirom, you told us about semaglutide, but what else is in the pipeline to treat MASH?
Yeah, Jeff, thank you. And again, just revisiting what you said, it's so exciting as a clinician to see that actually the global healthcare bodies and associations are moving forward to address these non-communicable diseases, specifically also MASH, which poses a major healthcare threat. And it's the American Association, EASL, but also your team that really pushed for that. So that's great to see as a clinician. And I think it's also important for partners to actually see that the field is developing and that there's more need for future therapies. And you rightfully said there's more in the pipeline. The class of incretins is really an exciting asset here. There are refinements of the incretins having both GLP-1 and, for example, glucagon or a GIP as co-agonists. So you're seeing the dual incretins. Semaglutide is a drug that's combining GLP-1 and glucagon agonism. Retardotide is a drug that actually is a triple agonist, and we see massive effects on intrahepatic fat, and studies exploring their effect with regards to hepatic outcomes are ongoing. I'm very excited about that. And it's actually the first time we're not using liver biopsy anymore to define the inclusion, but we're including patients based on NITs as we use them in clinics to make the indication to treat the patients.
I was just going to ask, when do you think we'll start to see some of these submissions or approvals coming through? So we have the pipeline, but how far down the line are we talking?
Yeah, I mean, these drugs are now in phase 3, and I think conditional readouts can be seen in 1 to 1.5 years. If you take non-cirrhotic population to endpoints, it might take 4 to 5 years. But I would say in the next 2 or 3 years, there's a lot of data coming on. And before we get done and wrap up, I just want to highlight, of course, that the more advanced patient populations could benefit from the FGF21 analogs. We've seen reversion of cirrhosis in a few selected patients with compensated cirrhosis. And actually, a readout I'm very excited about this year is lanifibranor. So that's the third mechanism that's coming, is the pan-PPAR agonist. The trial has been enrolled some time ago. I'm going to see data presented most likely at AASLD here for that drug.
Jörn, can you also tell us how to understand the data? What are the endpoints of the clinical trials for the drugs that are in the pipeline?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. We're currently looking at surrogate endpoints. This means we're looking at the improvement of the liver histology. There are two key factors that are linked to long-term outcomes, and this is A, that the scarring in the liver improves, so fibrosis regression by at least one stage. In patients that did have fibrosis on the initial biopsy, the histological fibrosis stage moves down by one. And this is probably the strongest endpoint because we know that fibrosis stage is correlating with outcomes in our patient. And that's the reason why the regulators have accepted the improvement in fibrosis as an endpoint where you can get conditional drug approval. The second endpoint that's typically studied also in liver histology is the MASH resolution, meaning the inflammation goes away. Ballooning goes down, inflammation goes down. And that's very important because the inflammation drives the fibrosis. So these two endpoints are looked at separately, but they're clearly interlinked. And in a potent drug, you'd like to see for both of them to improve because you need fibrosis to come back, and that's happening by resolving steatohepatitis or the inflammatory part. Now, long term, I think we'll still need hard outcomes for full approval.
Great. That's perfect. That's exactly what I think we needed to hear, that we're really looking at fibrosis regression and MASH resolution to show that these drugs work. Thank you, Jan. Well, I hope we've been able to convey to everyone what a remarkable time we're living in, that we're experiencing here in the field of mast cell and MASH. We have 2 FDA-approved drugs. We have a pipeline with anticipated submissions in the coming years to the FDA. And from a public health perspective, though, we need to remember that most people living with MASH are undiagnosed. A large number are unfamiliar with the condition or know very little about it as compared to cancer, diabetes, even viral hepatitis. And there's really very little awareness in the healthcare system in addition to the general population. So some of the things I think we need to be focusing on is growing our community and practice, going beyond the liver space. And that means not just engaging endocrinologists, general practitioners, but also cardiologists, other specialists, improving our models of care, engaging with dietitians and nutritionists, since that diet is so important to addressing mast cell and MASH. So, Jörn, thank you so much for walking us through the situation with these 2 new drugs and the pipeline. It's always great to hear your perspective, and you've been so involved in the development of these medications, but also raising awareness in general. And thank you to everyone listening for participating in this activity. And please continue on to answer the questions that follow and complete the evaluation. Thank you again.